Zhong Yuebai didn't expect to marry a man who had a one-night stand. As she was about to have the unexpected child aborted, Sang Qingze suddenly appeared and used 3 million to buy off her relationship with the Zhong family and the child in her womb. She always thought that their relationship was just a simple transaction. The man also told Zhong Yuebai indifferently, "I have someone I like, don't expect something that doesn't belong to you." Zhong Yuebai doesn't care. As long as she can leave the muddy swamp of the Zhong family, she can do whatever she wants, let alone take advantage of the influence of the Sang family to do what she wants, and also indulge in male sexuality. However, on the day when the marriage agreement was due, Zhong Yuebai was preparing to leave with her luggage when Sang Qingze suddenly hugged her and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't leave, it's always you that I like." Has Zhong Yuebai inherited billions of assets? Mud playing Kai, men only affect my speed of making money. Chapter 2. Forced face smash on the day of production inspection. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. In the still black Maybach, Zhong Yuebai sat in the passenger seat and remained silent for no less than 3 minutes, still feeling that she couldn't digest what she had just heard. Until Sang Qingze looked at her and asked with difficulty, "How old are you?" Zhong Yuebai is white and clean, with still baby fat on her face, clearly a student. 21 years old. Okay, now go to your house to get your household registration book. Sang Qingze breathed a sigh of relief, luckily she had reached the legal age for marriage. Mr. Sang doesn't seem like someone who would accept elders' arranged marriages. Zhong Yuebai vaguely guessed the meaning of the Sang family and mustered the courage to speak up. "Moreover, I came to the hospital voluntarily for an abortion. My stepmother followed me and that's why I made that mistake just now." She remembers 2 months ago, the night she met this person, she came to see the editor on a business trip and read the manga draft. When passing by the underground parking lot of the hotel, he was drugged and pulled into the car. They walked from the dim car to the hotel room, and behind them, Zhong Yuebai was almost knocked unconscious. How could he be such a strong and domineering person, obediently listening to his elders and marrying a strange woman for the sake of his child? Sang Qingze, who was focused on driving, glanced at her in surprise and then his gaze returned to the road ahead. "When I see everyone in the Sang family in the future, they will say that you were forced, remember clearly. Mr. Sang may have misunderstood. What I mean is, I don't want this child, nor do I want to get married." Facing the strong sense of oppression on the person, Zhong Yuebai expressed her thoughts and said, "I'm still in school and there's still something I want to do. The Sang family has a large fortune and will find someone willing to give birth to you. I don't think is suitable." After a moment of contemplation, Sang Qingze said calmly, "It's absolutely impossible to have an abortion now. You have no other choice but to accept the arrangement. The child is in my belly, what do I want? Can anyone else handle it?" Zhong Yuebai remained unyielding, knowing that this was her only bargaining chip and opportunity. The man next to him remained silent for a moment and raised his eyebrows. "Tell me about your conditions. Be concise and direct in purpose." Zhong Yuebai breathed a sigh of relief in her heart, her bright eyes lifted, and she looked at him word by word, saying, 3 things, first, divorce after the child is born, and during the marriage, we cannot let outsiders know about our relationship. Okay. Secondly, half a month later, the Shangying auction house will sell a piece of jade, and I want it. Okay. Thirdly. Zhong Yuebai took a deep breath, I want to bring down the Zhong family. Okay. Sang Qingze didn't even hesitate. As long as you fulfill your duties and do a good job of Mrs. Sang and Coke's grandma, these small matters won't be a big problem. Small matters. Zhong Yuebai's pale face flashed with mockery. The group of people from the Zhong family lay on their mother, sucking blood and using all their tricks to obtain something that, in front of the truly powerful, was like a never-ending mayfly. Fortunately, she can retrieve her mother's jade now. With this in mind, her gaze became even more determined. Okay, I promise you. People in City A say that after the old man's death, the old lady of the Sang family propped up the struggling Sang family, crisscrossed the shopping mall, and resorted to ruthless means, making it difficult to get close. If she can make those beasts of the Zhong family pay the price, she must get the favor of the old lady. Then they remained silent all the way, silently taking their household registration book from the Zhong family. Until standing outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, looking at the red notebook in duplicate in her hand, Zhong Yuebai couldn't believe that things were going so smoothly. According to the normal rhythm of the plot, shouldn't someone come out and shout, "Leave someone behind," while taking photos and signing names? Sang Qingze casually took 2 certificates and said calmly, "Leave the documents with me first, the old lady will be able to return to China the day after tomorrow. I have something to go, you and the driver will go back, and he will make a list of the old lady's likes and dislikes for you to memorize. The physical examination will be tomorrow morning. Remember to wake up early on an empty stomach." After explaining everything in one breath, he left without waiting for Zhong Yuebai's answer. Zhong Yuebai stayed in place until the driver arrived and picked her up to the old house. Thinking of the thick stack of prenuptial agreement documents she signed in the car before obtaining the certificate, one can glimpse what kind of behemoth the Sang family is. But I was still surprised to see the old house clock and moon white. The Sang family's old house is as big as a castle, and the Zhong family's small villa is placed here, like a small toilet. The butler politely and thoughtfully went to Zhong's house for her, brought back all her personal belongings, and arranged everything for her. From beginning to end, the entire Sang family, just like when obtaining the certificate, did not have anyone asking for her opinion before doing anything. As for Sang Qingze, they met at the hospital gate the next day. After seeing Zhong Yuebai, he only said lightly, "Let's go, it's already arranged." They came to the best private hospital in a city, located on the 8th floor, with high fees and even family background requirements. Small families like the Zhong family have almost no chance to come. Surprisingly, Sang Qingze went to the safety exit to answer the phone. While waiting quietly in the hallway, she accidentally met her half-sister, Zhong Kefi. Both sides were surprised when they met. "Zhong Yuebai, you idiot, is pregnant with a wild seed. Shouldn't you still have a wild idea? Follow me all the way here, just to get me to pay for your abortion, right?" Zhong Kefi was so proud that her nostrils were skyrocketing, so she didn't even notice Zhong Yuebai's attire, which was completely different from usual. "With you. Here." Zhong Yuebai stared at her with a smile on her face. "You deserve it too." Zhong Kefi sneered. If it weren't for the hospital not allowing loud noise, she would probably have laughed up in the sky. "I don't deserve it. Can your damn mother still come alive and give you money? I'll tell you, this time I'm here arranged by Junyugu to do marriage and medical examination. After the examination is over, the 2 of us will be getting engaged soon." "That's great," Zhong Yuebai chuckled angrily. "Wishing you scumbags a long time. Who gave you the courage to say that to me just because of your useless shoes?" Zhong Kefi was even more arrogant than her mother. "Zhong Yuebai, now you are a dog that anyone can beat, understand? If Xie Junyu likes you so much and values you so much, how could he let you do a gloomy premarital check? Up alone here." Zhong Yuebai laughed angrily. This younger sister, whose birthday is only 2 months away from her, has been persistent in taking away all things related to Zhong Yuebai since her mother's mistress came to power. Even a scumbag snatched with relish. Zhong Kefi rolled his eyes and retorted, his attitude arrogant to the point of arrogance. "You're a person who has been used once and then thrown away. It's better to think carefully about how to beg me so that I can give you some money and drain the bastard in your stomach." Looking at Zhong Kefi's attitude, Zhong Yuebai understood. My stepmother returned to the Zhong family without mentioning anything about the Sang family or money. Abortion. She couldn't help but sneer. Zhong Kefi, you are really stupid. You are truly someone who can hang out with Xie Junyu. Zhong Yuebai, you slut. Zhong Yuebai, a foolish and bad person, could easily drive her crazy with just a few words. However, the slap she slapped was accurately contained in mid-air by a large hand. Abortion. Streets. Sang Qingze's deep voice suddenly sounded in the quiet corridor. Chapter 3. Forced cohabitation on the day of meeting parents. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Sang. Mr. Sang. How could you be here? Zhong Yuebai's expression was as if she had seen a ghost. She greeted with a trembling voice, unaware of how embarrassed she was now in a half-slapped position. Are you Zhong Yuebai? Sang Qingze shook off her hand and squinted her eyes slightly. Mr. Sang, you. You actually. Zhong Yuebai's whole body lit up. It was the last banquet, and we passed each other in the restroom. Did you remember me? Shoo. Zhong Yuebai burst out laughing and walked over to Sang Qingze's side, standing still. Her half-smiling gaze fell on Zhong Yuebai. I'm afraid I misunderstood you. He came to accompany me for the prenatal check-up today. Without hesitation, Zhong Yuebai loudly retorted, what kind of thing are you? Can you make? Halfway through the conversation, she finally realized something, staring at Zhong Yuebai like a collapsed worldview. This is a hospital, you can't make loud noise, don't you know? The doctor following behind Sang Qingze also understood the situation and shouted at Zhong Yuebai. Zhong Yuebai was stunned and completely speechless. Sang Qingze didn't even glance at her, protected Zhong Yuebai, and spoke calmly, Dr. Zhao, this kind of person should not be received again in the future. Okay, join the blacklist of all hospitals under Sang's name immediately, said the doctor. Then he followed several bodyguards from Sang Qingze all year round and forced Zhong Yuebai to leave. Mr. Sang. Mr. Sang, I know I was wrong. Mr. Sang. When she was dragged out by the bodyguard, the sound of begging for mercy echoed throughout the corridor of the entire floor. But no one cares. From beginning to end, Zhong Yuebai stood calmly in place, watching her die. Afterwards, the people on the 8th floor began to perform a full-body examination for Zhong Yuebai, especially the prenatal examination, and worked hard all morning. Finally, in the ultrasound room, Zhong Yuebai, who had finished all the examinations and was already very tired, lay quietly in bed and had the little nurse gently apply coupling agents to her. Sang Qingze stood not far away through the curtain, gazing at the computer in front of the doctor without any images, unsure of what he was thinking. A few minutes later, as the probe moved through Zhong Yuebai's flat abdomen, a slight but regular heartbeat suddenly came from the instrument. In the silent room, like small drums. The child is developing normally, very healthy, and has a strong heartbeat. The doctor moved his probe and said with a smile, congratulations, both of you. We're going to be parents now. Despite the screen on the computer, Zhong Yuebai couldn't understand it. But this is the first time since she became pregnant that she realizes that there is a life being nurtured in her belly. Before this, all she had in her mind was to reclaim everything from the Zhong family, shed this child, and break free from the control of the Sang family. But now this is a baby, her child. On the way out of the hospital, Zhong Yuebai earnestly placed her hand on her stomach for the first time and began to treat the child as a person. After giving birth to the child, as long as you are well behaved, you can always be Mrs. Sang. The Sang family guarantees your lifelong stability. After a long silence, Sang Qingze suddenly spoke up, interrupting her thoughts, whether grandma is here or not. Zhong Yuebai looked up slightly and guessed his original plan. It seems that he really doesn't want to get married either. His plan is probably to divorce after Mrs. Sang's death or have his child aborted. She also fell silent for a moment and slowly spoke, is the name you called that night the person you like? Sang Qingze, who was walking ahead, didn't even respond. I asked the driver to take you home. Grandma still has 2 days to go, you know what to do. She has a bad personality, is irritable, and very picky. You'd better prepare well. Then, there was no further communication between them. In the following 2 days, Sang Qingze did not return to his old house. Zhong Yuebai was not interested in caring about his private life, so she obediently accepted the arrangements, studied etiquette norms, and understood the structure of the Sang family. Until 2 days later, Mrs. Sang returned. She prepared mentally all night in advance and thought of all the questions that the old lady might ask. For example, what means did you use to seduce my grandson? For example, when can the sour taste on your body be removed? For example, after giving birth, go away. Women like you can't pester my precious grandson. They can stop him by fighting. But Mrs. Sang's appearance caught her off guard. How did Sang Qingze, such a foolish kid, attract such a beautiful little girl like you? The old lady got out of the car and said to her at first glance. This. Zhong Yuebai's words were interrupted. Why did you get the certificate so early? You're not even afraid that stupid kid did it on purpose, just wanted to entangle you. The old lady was filled with indignation. This. Zhong Yu's white pupils trembled. You go and call Sang Qingze back to me. The old lady patted her cane heavily. I want to see. I haven't seen him for months. How did he get rid of his foolishness? Then he grabbed Zhong Yuebai's hand and walked with trembling but firm steps into the door of the old house with her. In the living room, Mrs. Sang held on to Zhong Yuebai, constantly looking and praising. Her old eyes widened a bit. While praising, it is also very puzzling. That stupid kid, like his father, looks like he's seeing a ghost when he sees a woman. This time, he actually had an epiphany and brought back such a beautiful granddaughter to me. He shouldn't have been possessed by evil, right? Throughout the process, Zhong Yuebai couldn't even get in touch. It can be seen that this is indeed a swift and decisive old lady. So when Sang Qingze got home, he happened to hear the old lady contacting the dancing god. The old lady saw that someone had returned and was busy hanging up the phone, questioning loudly. Yuebai is young and still pregnant with your child. Are you leaving her alone at home and ignoring her? Do you still have any conscience? Zhong Yuebai thought they were going to argue and was ready to persuade. Surprisingly, Sang Qingze simply said, okay, I'll come back after I finish my work at the company. The old lady nodded in satisfaction, sat down again, took Zhong Yuebai's hand, and said earnestly. Yuebai, even if Sang Qingze is stupid and clumsy, you don't look too smart. I didn't care about the Zhong family before, but in the future, you and he will become husband and wife, and we must learn. We must not be deceived by people like him who are so foolish. The most important thing is to lose face. Throughout the journey, Sang Qingze listened quietly beside him without any refutation. Zhong Yuebai looked at the materials at hand, then at the kind-looking old lady beside her, and quietly threw the former into the trash can. Grandma, rest assured that Qingze is very kind to me and won't deceive me. On the day of obtaining the certificate, he promised me to take good care of me for a lifetime. Her transaction with Sang Qingze involves coaxing her grandmother, shouldn't that be considered? Sure enough, after she finished speaking, Sang Qingze naturally walked over and took her hand, saying to her grandmother. How could Yuebai and I be so affectionate and deceive her? They snuggled together, looking like a happy family. The old lady slapped her big leg and made a decision. That's right. All right, my worries have also eased. You two go upstairs and sleep. What? Zhong Yuebai and Sang Qingze spoke at the same time. You have just gotten married, and even if Yuebai is already pregnant, there should be a proper process. However, Yuebai is young and Sang Qingze is eye-catching. She is too high-profile and easy to gossip about. For the honeymoon, let's skip work and spend it at home. Let's arrange a serious one after Yuebai graduates. After arranging these things, the old lady stood up trembling from the sofa, smiling so hard that her eyes narrowed into a slit, and said happily. All right, you two young people, let's live in a world of two. I'll continue to go back to France to play. Oh, by the way, Sang Qingze, protect Yuebai. If something happens to her, you won't come see me again. After she finished speaking, she didn't wait for Sang Qingze to express her opinion before going out and getting in the car, and the whole action was completed in one go. Only Zhong Yuebai, who was dull, and Sang Qingze, who had a bad complexion, were left behind, as well as a butler responsible for keeping an eye on their married life. Chapter 4. Heavenly Price Auction. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At night, in the bedroom, Zhong Yuebai and Sang Qingze looked at each other. The butler sent by Mrs. Sang is right outside. The image of their loving husband and wife will continue to be portrayed. Why don't I sleep on the sofa and you sleep on the bed? Zhong Yuebai came out of the bathroom, pinched the hem of her pajamas, and took the initiative to speak. No need, the old lady is not so easy to deceive. Sang Qingze picked up his pajamas and walked towards the bathroom, his footsteps slightly unsteady, so he could only rub his eyebrows. Make the bed and go to bed. I'll come out later. Zhong Yuebai watched as he closed the bathroom door and lay flat, then glanced at the 5-meter-sized double bed. After careful consideration, she folded an extra blanket and placed it horizontally in the middle of the big bed before lying down with peace of mind. There were too many things to do on this day, and she was also tired. As soon as she closed her eyes, she completely fell asleep. But halfway through, I suddenly felt a heavy pressure on my body. Opening his eyes hazily, he could only see Sang Qingze's handsome face as a demon, as well as a pair of dark, deep, and disoriented eyes. At the same time, a rough and thick hand appeared under the blanket, peeking into the hem of her nightgown and beginning to wander. The other hand, sensing her resistance, pressed her hands together on top of her head, completely unable to move. That guy's lips are also moving around her collarbone, as if she hasn't found the key yet. The heavy and rapid breathing blended with each other, mixed with ambiguous sounds, echoing in the quiet room. The strong alcohol aroma lingered around the tip of her nose, and Zhong Yuebai suddenly remembered that this guy seemed to have had 2 glasses of red wine during their dinner. Only 2 cups. Is this drunk? Sang Qingze, Zhong Yuebai's hand pressed hard against his chest. You see clearly. I am Zhong Yuebai. The other party's highly aggressive behavior still did not stop at all. Do you remember to be quiet? If you continue to do it, it will be betraying your feelings. Quietly. Sang Qingze murmured, pausing for a moment. Sensing that the person pressing on her stopped, Zhong Yuebai was about to burst into tears with excitement. Yeah, quietly. She must be pretty, right? Where was your first meeting? Sang Qingze's confused eyes narrowed slightly, with a hint of emptiness added. That year, my parents had an accident, my grandmother was seriously ill, the Sang family was in chaos, and I was only 14 years old. A few bystanders had a shady hand, so I hid at her house. So she's your lifesaver? Zhong Yuebai asked casually. She didn't think carefully, only worried that the other person might get drunk and do something. No, it's not. Sang Qingze murmured in a determined and loud voice, she's hope, a hope with warmth and light. Oh, that's the lifesaver. Zhong Yuebai sighed in a daze that in her lifetime, Sang Qingze had taken over all the tricks in the novels of the domineering CEO. A life and death crisis, saved by the white moonlight. She drugged me in the middle of the night, and she originally thought that with the influence of the Sang family, it was impossible for Sang Qingze to be drugged by such a bad trick now. I didn't expect there to be so many twists and turns. As soon as the words fell for 5 seconds, Sang Qingze's hands began to play around again. Zhong Yuebai's thoughts returned and she quickly twisted and struggled, casually asking, Sang Qingze, can you do Zhong Yuebai a favor? Zhong Yuebai. Sang Qingze paused again. Yeah, do me a favor. Zhong Yuebai breathed a long sigh of relief and casually said. I don't even remember what happened before I was 10 years old. Can you help me find any good friends I had when I was a child? The words fell and remained silent for a long time. In late summer and early autumn, the cold wind blew in from outside the window, and Sang Qingze seemed to have woken up from drinking. Turns out, she really forgot everything. Sure. After his deep voice fell, he tilted his head and fell asleep. Zhong Yuebai struggled for too long and was also tired, so she decided to sleep in this position. The next morning, the warm sunshine scattered on the bed. When she opened her eyes, she saw Sang Qingze tightly closing her eyes, enveloping her in her arms and sleeping soundly. You don't have to think Zhong Yuebai could guess, this is probably his sleeping position when he was with, quietly. She looked up slightly, rubbing her forehead against the other person's slightly stubble chin, and saw his delicate skin and long, thick eyelashes. It's hard to imagine that this more delicate appearance than a woman belongs to a man. What are you looking at? Sang Qingze suddenly opened his eyes in a secluded manner. Zhong Yuebai was startled. I'm thinking about things, not looking at you. Sang Qingze responded calmly, without any intention of exploring what she was thinking, and got up by getting dressed. Apart from realizing that my upper body was completely naked and there were a few dark red scratches, my movement stopped for a moment. I seem to have no recollection of what happened last night. Before Zhong Yuebai left, he only opened his mouth and didn't ask anything. In the following period of time, Sang Qingze did not get drunk again, and still got off work on time every day and accompanied her for prenatal checkups. When the butler is around, he will be even more gentle. Soon, it was one of the 3 requirements they had when they got married. The Shannying auction house auction. The Zhong family is not eligible to participate in this kind of auction, so Zhong Yuebai speculates that her mother's jade should only be in the first half of the regular market. She followed Sang Qingze onto the cruise ship and sat in a luxurious auction room before realizing that she was wrong. The jade you want is at the end. Zhong Yuebai took Sang Qingze's arm and heard him bend over and whisper in her ear. How did the Zhong family know about the items at the bottom of the box? Zhong Yuebai clenched her hand hanging on her side. Because it was auctioned off by the Zhong family, it's my mom's property. Even if I get it back this time, the money will still fall into their hands, and there will be the dowry given by Sang Qingze. How could she be willing if these accounts were not cleared thoroughly? On the auction table, items she had rarely heard of were bought at exorbitant prices that she had never heard of. Zhong Yuebai didn't expect that piece of jade to be so valuable. Finally, as the long process came to an end, the translucent jade was carefully placed under the light. The starting price is 80 million yuan. Sang Qingze didn't even blink when he saw the price. For some reason, Zhong Yuebai felt inexplicably flustered and could only lift the curtain to quietly observe the situation outside. As expected, the mother and daughter of the Zhong family sat in a small corner to observe. After a brief silence in the entire venue, the sound of quotations echoed one after another. 8,005. 9,000. 9,005. In less than 2 minutes, it has already reached billions. Sang Qingze waited quietly, only to shout out 200 million outside before saying in a deep voice, 400 million. With just one word spoken, the whole room was in an uproar. For, truly worthy of the Sang family. Some time ago, someone said that Sang Qingze was weak and couldn't support the Sang family. I see that the Sang family is in his hands and is thriving. That piece of jade can be called an priceless treasure, but our family can't afford to have so much working capital. The Sang family also valued its collectible value when they bought it, right? Unfortunately, who dares to argue with the Sang family? The auctioneer saw that no one would continue to bid, and was about to strike the hammer when he heard a lazy and playful voice in the private room across from Sang Qingze. 500 million. The familiar voice made Zhong Yuebai's face turn pale. Chapter 1. Forced marriage on the day of abortion. You are listening at novel full.audio. You despicable bastard. Oh, what have I done to raise you up with good food and drink? That's how you repay me. You came to have an abortion at a young age, and I don't even know whose it is. How can I get married in the future? Outside the city center, a middle-aged woman sat on a chair crying loudly, attracting people around her to point and point. In front of her stood a cute and fair girl named Zhong Yuebai with a ponytail tied, listening to the discussions with a blank expression. Judging by her age, she's only 20 years old, right? TSK, the little girl nowadays is really amazing. She's so young and mischievous, she even has a big belly. In ancient times, it was like soaking a pig cage. It's not easy for her mother to look at her. What's the use of raising such an unfilial daughter? It's not disturbing enough. I guess I haven't read a book, have I? An uneducated woman doesn't even know how to love herself. It's like this, having a big belly early, and the child's father doesn't even know who it is. The middle-aged woman cried even louder when she heard the discussion. Since you find it embarrassing, stop talking and sign it quickly. Zhong Yuebai sneered as she held the consent letter to terminate her pregnancy. And I have to remind you that I was raised by my mother. It's only been a few years, and you've really forgotten your identity. As a junior, I'll show you a sense of superiority. Otherwise, she would feel disgusted to think of the names of the Zhong family if she insisted on their signatures. Back then, my mother married into the Zhong family as a daughter. After working hard for so long, seeing the improvement of the Zhong family, I was infuriated by this kind of woman leading the child to come to my door. Now that the mother and son have entered the house, do they still want to ride on her head and lead a good life? Don't even think about it. Pop. After the crisp sound of applause, the cries and discussions suddenly came to an end. My stepmother shook her painful hand and cursed in a high, sharp voice. Just you. Mom, that shameless bastard. I don't know who gave birth to you as a wild seed. Do you still have the face to say this? She did too much dirty things and died early. Do you still think she has a long face? Zhong Yuebai covered her swollen face and waved her back without hesitation. Pop. She sneered, if you don't know how to sign, hurry up and leave. With so much talk, do you really think I don't know about your dirty behavior and dare not shake it out? Go straight to the bathroom and turn right to the second door. You only know how to spray feces, so eat more. I pulled you up, you said that to me. Oh my God, how could I be so miserable? In a fit of anger, the stepmother yelled and grabbed Zhong Yuebai's hair, tearing it apart and about to hit her. The girl stubbornly gritted her teeth and fought back, but she was too thin and weak to beat her. The onlookers raised their phones to shoot videos, not to seek justice, but simply to watch the excitement. And then, let go of your dirty hands. A deep voice rang out, and the broad hands easily controlled the fist that landed on Zhong Yuebai's body. Everyone suddenly realized that a tall and upright man with a cold and stern face had come from somewhere, blocking Zhong Yuebai's face. My stepmother was about to start fighting, but she couldn't stop and suddenly cursed loudly. Where did you come from as an adulterer again? Look clearly, this little slut is pregnant with someone else's slut. Do you still want to catch up and become a father? You two adulterers and prostitutes really think our Zhong family is easy to bully. Zhong family. The man sneered and gave a look. 2 rows of bodyguards wearing sunglasses appeared from his side and headed straight for his stepmother. In just 3 seconds, he completely held her down and couldn't move. While also warning her softly that if he spoke recklessly, he would break her arm. Zhong Yuebai was blocked by the tall figure of the man, unable to see her stepmother's face. But just thinking about it, she thought it must be very exciting, so she tried to step over him and watch the excitement. However, the man suddenly turned around to face her, his dark eyes narrowed slightly before taking a few steps forward and gentlemanly reaching out his hand. Hello, Miss Zhong Yuebai, I am Sang Qingze. The height difference between the two was nearly 20 centimeters. Zhong Yuebai lifted her thin and slender face, revealing a delicate jawline and a circular burn behind her ear. In an instant, the scene of that crazy night 3 months ago flooded into my mind, quietly, hello fragrant. Sir, you got the wrong person. Let go of me quickly. No, don't do it. Quietly. Ah. Don't leave me quietly. Scattered messy clothes on the ground, the man's heavy breathing, bound limbs, tearing pain at that time, there was also the same perspective of looking up, the same jawline, the same scar located behind the ear. So, it's him. The fresh memory instantly turned Zhong Yuebai pale. The hand that was about to be extended also shrank back like an electric shock. Upon seeing this, Sang Qingze's eyes darkened slightly. He withdrew his hand and pointed to his stepmother, saying, "Did she force you to have an abortion?" "Your stepmother?" Yes, Zhong Yuebai nodded in surprise and finally realized. City A, who doesn't know the Sang family, who doesn't know the thunderous name Sang Qingze? That is a presence that no one dares to provoke, but unfortunately, the family has been passed down for 10 generations, and it is said that the leaders of the Sang family in this generation are not close to women. If Mrs. Sang hadn't been concerned about the face of the wealthy, she would have been so anxious that she would have sent advertisements all over the world asking for a son with a lot of money. So Zhong Yuebai's hand unconsciously gently covered her lower abdomen. Sang Qingze raised his eyebrows, took out a card and threw it on the ground in front of his stepmother, saying calmly. "People, our Sang family wants it. This is 3 million yuan. From now on, Zhong Yuebai has nothing to do with you. If you agree, you can sign it." Hiss. Everyone takes a deep breath. They actually belong to the Sang family. Oh no, that girl is pregnant with a golden egg. Does that woman still want to kill the precious grandchild that Mrs. Sang has been hoping for so many years? She can get the money without having to die tragically. If it were me, I would definitely agree. Come on, you also need to be able to seduce that person. If it's so easy to get started, why is Mrs. Sang so anxious these years? The stepmother, whose face turned pale and pale as she was pinned to the ground, stared fixedly at the card and contract thrown in front of her. Her eyes were torn and she refused to take a pen, but she still dared not speak. Sang Ziqing didn't even lift his eyelids, with one hand carrying a pocket and his suit pants perfectly fitting his legs. The small company of the Zhong family has suffered a loss of 3 million yuan this year. Marrying a daughter will make up for the loss, which is already enough. Once you get the money, just leave. I don't want to say it again, can you hear me clearly? Upon hearing him easily reveal his relationship with his stepmother, Zhong Yuebai knew even the most secretive accounts of the Zhong family, and her hand, which was covering her stomach, suddenly shook. While waiting for his stepmother to sign, Sang Qingze had people collect the people's phones one by one, watching them delete all their photos and videos. From beginning to end, I didn't take a second glance at Zhong Yuebai. Until he forced his stepmother to sign the contract, his gaze was projected and he only said one word. "Let's go." Then Zhong Yuebai was surrounded by 6 bodyguards and escorted onto Maybach parked at the hospital entrance. As soon as she got into the car, she saw Sang Qingze not driving, but staring at her. That gaze was not like looking at people, but rather like looking at lifeless objects. She frowned and said, "Mr. Sang wants to spend 3 million to buy the child in my belly." "It's not a child," Sang Qingze frowned. "It's marriage." Chapter 5. Love Enemy Meets with Extra Red Eyes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Li Yu. Sang Qingze recited the name of the person across from him with unclear meaning. Even if Zhong Yuebai couldn't see that face, she couldn't contain her trembling whole body. The painful memories of those 6 months can only remain in her memory, with Li Yu firmly squeezing her shoulder and questioning her with a grim expression. "I thought the nightmare was over, but I didn't expect to reunite in such a place. Back then, Li Yu just made a bet and played a game with a wealthy person, forcing her to stay by her side for a whole year. If it weren't for Li Yu's white moonlight returning to China a year later, Li Yu would have shown great compassion and let her go free, and she would have almost lost hope of surviving. 600 million. In reality, next to Zhong Yuebai, Sang Qingze once again raised a sign to offer a quote. When the man's condensed gaze fell on Zhong Yuebai, it carried complex thoughts. Li Yu has a strange temper. No woman has dared to approach him in these years. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Do you know each other?" Zhong Yuebai shook her head in a panic and looked at her toes without speaking. Li Yu, such an ignorant and inexperienced playboy, has a temper that can be described in just one word. Fortunately, not many people know about their relationship, and now it has been completely severed. Everyone can treat it as if everything had never happened. Zhong Yuebai glanced at Sang Qingze's face and spoke with confusion, "Are the Sang and Li families not compatible?" "No, it's me and him. We have a personal grudge." Sang Qingze saw that she didn't want to mention Li Yu a word, and her face turned cold. There was a hint of killing intent in her dark eyes. The atmosphere in the private room was already somewhat quiet, and the temperature completely dropped to freezing point. Zhong Yuebai was vaguely certain in her heart that Sang Qingze and Li Yu must have had a big grudge. Maybe it was because they were fighting for Li Yu's white moonlight. Meanwhile, the opposite private room. After hearing Sang Qingze's exorbitant price, Li Yu's crimson lips curved in a seductive manner. In his narrow eyes, 4 bold characters were written. Determined to succeed. The butler next to him wiped the sweat off his forehead with a handkerchief and whispered, "Young master, we are here for that matter this time, and you are still planning to propose to Miss Zhou. You really shouldn't invest more money in such a piece of jade." "It's not related to anything." Li Yu's slender legs overlapped and he changed to a more comfortable sitting position. "It's Sang Qingze, understand?" The butler gave a bitter smile and stopped speaking. In the private room across from him, before he could bid again, a voice sounded that made everyone take a cold breath. 8 billion. Li Yu, who was originally proud and waiting to see Sang Qingze play, couldn't help but sit up straight. This time, the auction house was completely silent. The item sold for a much better price than expected, and the auctioneer smiled and struck the hammer, ending the sky-high auction. After the auction ended, regardless of whether they were familiar with the Sang family or not, after seeing the financial resources of the Sang family, they all gathered together to exchange greetings. Mr. Sang's big move this time is probably to prepare for Miss Zhou, right? So, it seems like a good thing is coming up for both of you. I heard that Miss Zhou is not only the only daughter of Mr. Zhou, but also as beautiful as Mrs. Zhou. She has received various elite education since childhood and completed her doctoral studies in the Ivy League at a young age. If Mr. Sang marries Miss Zhou, it would be an added bonus, no one can stop her. Congratulations. When we get married, Mr. Sang will send me an invitation. Zhong Yuebai hid in the private room, listening to the constant praise of Miss Zhou, and clenched her hand hanging beside her into a fist. At first, Li Yu became entangled with her because Miss Zhou had some resemblance to her appearance. Unexpectedly, Sang Qingze also, "I misunderstood everyone," said Sang Qingze at the door of the private room, glancing at the tightly closed door without leaving a trace. Her deep voice could hardly hear a cheerful tone. "This is for my wife, it's a wedding gift I gave her." "Madam." Everyone was instantly stunned. "Well. Mr. Sang has hardly been a lesbian in recent years, and there's only one Miss Zhou around who stands out." Someone turned their eyes twice and thought, "We're offending you by saying this. Why don't you ask Madam to come out and let us apologize in person?" Suddenly, there were many harmonious sounds. The woman who could make Mr. Sang move and defeat the Zhou family, sitting quietly in Mrs. Sang's seat, is definitely not a fuel. Efficient lamp. Please this person, can you also save a lot of trouble when dealing with the Sang family in the future? But Sang Qingze only glanced lightly at the person speaking, and then returned to the private room without saying a word. Until the door closed, no one saw even a corner of Mrs. Sang's clothes. Everyone looked at each other and whispered. Mr. Sang's protection of this new lady is really good. I don't know who the daughter of the Sang family is. She can marry into the Sang family, so she shouldn't be so low-key, right? I heard that the Zhou family is infatuated with Mr. Sang, but he never changes his mind. If someone really cuts off his beard halfway, he probably won't give up easily. There will be more trouble in the future. Madame Sang is so mysterious, I'm afraid she's also a powerful character. Let's stand in line early, little shrimp like us. Then, there was a mournful sound. In the private room, Sang Qingze replied to emails with her laptop, while Zhong Yuebai pricked her ears and listened to the faint voices of discussion outside. Unfortunately, those people quickly dispersed. After confirming that no one outside would see Zhong Yuebai, Sang Qingze closed his computer and said, "Let's go to the bedroom first, and then we can play on the cruise ship for 3 days." Auctions of this level in City A have similar practices. But as they walked out of the private door, they saw Li Yu waiting outside early. Li Yu was wearing a flamboyant wine-red suit, with a bangs on his forehead that could barely block some of the cold and sinister gaze. At the sight of him, Zhong Yuebai was startled and instinctively hid behind Sang Qingze. The tall figure of the man tightly blocked her, who was thin and small. "What's up?" Facing Li Yu, Sang Qingze raised her eyelids. "I heard you married someone else." Li Yu put his hands in his pockets and raised his chin. "Since that's the case, stay away from her in the future, you know." Upon hearing this, Sang Qingze smiled rather than smiled. "I thought you would be interested in my wife. Besides her, I wouldn't have any crush on any woman." "Sang Qingze, I'm not at the same level as you." Li Yu looked as if he didn't take Sang Qingze seriously. Sang Qingze smiled at his expression and said, "You're almost under Mr. Li's command and have really grown up. A 22-year-old boy, full of energy, foolish and childish, can be understood." Zhong Yuebai finally remembered that when Sang Qingze was 22 years old, he had already taken over and could firmly control the entire Sang family. Compared to his former self, he now only has a deeper understanding of the city. "What she likes is me like this. Without you among us in the future, we will be getting engaged in a few days." Li Yu was very proud. Standing behind Sang Qingze, Zhong Yuebai could hear every word clearly. At this moment, her trembling body suddenly regained calmness. She smiled appropriately on her small face and walked out from behind Sang Qingze, extending her fair arm. "Hello, Mr. Li, I am Qingze's wife, Zhong Yuebai." Chapter 6. Let Your Dad Speak. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhong Yuebai. Li Yu looked at the familiar face and was stunned. "Are you still alive? I didn't expect your good fortune to come soon. I wish you and Miss Zhou all the best." Zhong Yuebai smiled brightly. "Don't forget to invite us to your wedding." Li Yu's gaze glared fiercely at her, instantly realizing what had happened, and also wanting to see a little bit of the former infatuation and timidity from this woman. "But there's nothing." Li Yu widened her eyes and bulging veins on her forehead, but still managed to suppress her voice and question her. "Isn't it that you like Junyu? Why did you marry Sang Qingze in the end?" "Zhong Yuebai, this is your love. That's what you said, you're not someone who is fickle." Zhong Yuebai didn't pay attention to Li Yu, but first explained to Sang Qingze. "I have been in a relationship with Li Yu for a year before, and the reasons are very complicated. The relationship is very simple. I did cheat you just now, and I will explain it when I get home." "Okay," Sang Qingze said lightly. "Zhong Yuebai." Li Yu roared, "I'm still in front of you. How dare you flirt with Sang Qingze?" Zhong Yuebai looked up at the man who would become furious with just a few words, and suddenly understood what kind of mood Sang Qingze had when he smiled just now. Mr. Li, we have already broken up. Moreover, you are also going to marry Miss Zhou, she smiled. Besides, I have nothing to do with you when talking to my legal husband. Sure enough, as soon as Miss Zhou was mentioned, Li Yu, who was already flustered, settled down. In his pitch-black eyes, there was a reflection of Zhong Yuebai's figure, but what came to mind was that girl, Qingze, let's go. Zhong Yuebai took the initiative to hold Sang Qingze's hand, and the man also cooperated to take her away. But behind her, Li Yu, who had regained his senses, rushed towards her and fiercely pinched her shoulder, questioning loudly. You, a woman like you, have always been hypocritical towards me. Now that Han Junyu is useless, you can kick him away and climb up the branches of Sang Qingze. Who do you think we are? Who do you think you are? Li Yu. Zhong Yuebai screamed. Nightmare-like memories come back to my mind. A rainy night with lightning and thunder, a painful neck, a dying despair. She thought she couldn't escape Li Yu's clutches this time, but the next second, the person was forcibly pulled away. At the same time, she fell into a warm embrace and heard the scorching breath coming from above, as well as the person's angry shout. Li Yu, where's your brain? Dare you touch my people too? Your person. Who the hell are you? Li Yu was already in a fit of anger, completely losing his sanity. He punched Sang Qingze hard on the side of the face. Zhong Yuebai was stunned, and she accidentally released Sang Qingze. As she watched him wipe away the blood from the corner of his mouth, she also punched heavily. With the power of lightning and flint, the butler of the Li family finally realized what had happened and rushed over desperately to hold on to the enraged Li Yu. At the same time, the cabin sounded an alarm and there was an anxious announcement. Notice. The cruise ship has hit a reef and is in danger of sinking. Passengers are advised to proceed to the first floor in an orderly manner and board a lifeboat. Notice. The cruise ship has hit a reef and is in danger of sinking. Passengers are advised to proceed to the first floor in an orderly manner and board a lifeboat. Notification. Zhong Yuebai listened to the urgent notifications over and over again, quickly pulling the sleeves of others and saying, Sang Qingze, let's go quickly. The man nodded and placed his hand on her shoulder, patting her comfortingly. Don't worry, the safety measures of this ship are well done, there won't be any danger. Unfortunately, some people do not allow them to achieve their wishes. Zhong Yuebai, even if you die here today, you have to explain it to me clearly. Under the cover of the alarm, Li Yu's voice became even more ferocious. But this time, Sang Qingze and Zhong Yuebai tacitly ignored him and ran towards the direction of the stairs together. Li Yu could only catch up, but he kept talking all the way. Zhong Yuebai, do you think I can play around casually? When you shook your tail and begged for mercy at me back then, I still remember clearly. What are you pretending to be now? Zhong Yuebai, do you really think I have no choice but to marry Sang Qingze? I don't believe it. You can still pretend to be dead and run away like you did back then. Zhong Yuebai, UTM. Have you had enough, Li Yu? Zhong Yuebai couldn't bear the disturbance and could only pause his steps to interrupt his words. When you forced me to be with you back then, it was because Miss Zhou didn't like you, and I looked a bit like her. Now that the authentic products have returned, are you still pursuing high imitation? How come I don't know when Li Xiao has been so passionate? Or, don't tell me, you've been disgusted with me for a whole year, and now you're starting to remember. Are you cheap, Li Yu? Li Yu, who kept talking nonsense, finally subsided. His somewhat stunned gaze fell on the backs of Zhong Yuebai and Sang Qingze, very complicated. The first floor of the cruise ship is crowded with people. The staff are beckoning women and children to board first, while men ride in the lifeboat behind them. Zhong Yuebai hesitated for a moment, but still didn't go and chose to stand with Sang Qingze. Li Yu also caught up from behind and looked at the two of them, opening his mouth but not speaking. Sang Qingze lowered his head and leaned towards Zhong Yuebai's ear. In a low voice, there was not much fluctuation. You go to the lifeboat first, I'll wait here. It's not too dangerous, I can wait a little longer. Zhong Yuebai looked up and smiled. She wasn't worried about Sang Qingze, she just felt that the relationship between the two was originally a simple and pure transaction. Now, under the impact of Li Yu, she should never show loyalty to her boss. Beside him, Li Yu rarely got angry and said, "Moonlight, you go quickly. Both Sang Qingze and I can swim, so we don't need you to accompany us." As soon as he finished speaking, he felt a cold gaze shooting towards him. Before he could see who it was, he heard Sang Qingze holding Zhong Yuebai's hand and saying seriously. "Just because there is not much danger doesn't mean there is no danger. You should understand your own importance, and you are still pregnant with a child. Even for the sake of your child's safety, you shouldn't take any risks. Are you pregnant?" Li Yu's voice trembled slightly. "Take care of yourself," Zhong Yuebai gazed at Sang Qingze. "I am waiting for you on the shore." "Well, definitely." Sang Qingze nodded heavily. After speaking, call the staff and ask them to take Zhong Yuebai with them. This time, Zhong Yuebai did not refuse again and left in silence. Leaving only Li Yu, he stared at Sang Qingze intently but couldn't speak for any reason. No matter what you have in the past, it has nothing to do with you in the future. "Stay away from her," said Sang Qingze calmly. He glanced casually at the person who was eager to squeeze onto the lifeboat, making sure that Zhong Yuebai was safely escorted by the staff before turning his gaze to Li Yu. "You'd better be obedient, otherwise I don't mind letting the Li family lose an heir. As for your threat." He chuckled lightly at the thought, "It's a bit useful for your father to speak." Chapter 7. Until now, there has been no peace in the land. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Zhong Yuebai was in the lounge until she saw Sang Qingze standing safely in front of her, and only then did she feel a little relieved. "Do you have anything to do?" This is the first sentence that Sang Qingze said to her. Zhong Yuebai looked up at him in disbelief, but what she saw was still the calm face of the other person. She slightly dispelled some doubts and said, "I'm fine, it's you. Did Li Yu hit the key?" Sang Qingze casually took out the jade worth 800 million from her pocket and placed it in her hand. In a cold voice, mixed with a faint hoarse voice, he said, "I've got my things. Let's go home. Think about what you and Li Yu have to say." Zhong Yuebai lowered her eyes and looked at the jade in her hand, confirming that it was just her own illusion. How could Sang Qingze have any thoughts about her, just with her cold face? How much of the money from selling this piece of jade can be given to the Zhong family? She caught up with Sang Qingze, and there is also 3 million from the hospital. It's me and you who got married, and this money shouldn't be given to that woman no matter how it is calculated. Well, I know, Sang Qingze said slowly in a magnetic voice, as if with the power of bewitching. The owner behind this auction is me. Ah. Before auctioning off this item, I had already conducted a thorough background and ownership investigation. The Zhong family did not have any written documents or personal evidence to prove that this jade belonged to them. Sang Qingze's dark eyes turned twice, staring at Zhong Yuebai, who was looking up at her and chuckling. On the contrary, it's your mother. Not only does she have a lot of images and written materials to prove that this jade belongs to her, but there is also a notarized document left by her before her death, which gifted this jade to you. Zhong Yuebai said blankly, "So, you bought my things with your money on your territory?" Sang Qingze raised his eyebrows and said, "I thought you wanted me to buy this jade because you agreed to the auction." Before he could finish speaking, Zhong Yuebai grabbed his collar. "Where's the money?" Zhong Yuebai felt that she must have a fierce and cruel expression now. "Where's my money?" "Here, 800 million yuan. Sang Qingze stuffed several bank cards into her palm. "You are about to become the mother of the eldest grandson of the Sang family. This is my personal compensation to you. On the way home afterwards, Zhong Yuebai never had any further communication with him. She just wants to rush to the bank immediately and check the balance. Of course, the most satisfying thing was that the Zhong family was busy all day and ended up getting nothing. So 2 days later, when the Zhong family called her, she was not surprised at all. Yuebai, your father is getting older and has been working hard for years. He almost lost half of his life in this fall. The person on the phone was Aunt Li, who has been taking care of Zhong Yuebai since childhood. After all, he is also a relative with blood thicker than water. Come back and see him, he is also old. Zhong Yuebai sneered and said, Aunt Li, have you forgotten how thoughtful you have been to my care over the years? This. On the other end of the phone, the voice paused. You and that mother and daughter had a comfortable time at home singing and harmonizing. You've been living for too long, you've really forgotten how much you weigh. She looked at her clean and tidy nails, and told them, I'll go back tomorrow. Let's end this big show of pretending to be sick early. We're all so familiar now, there's no need. She didn't forget that the jade was returned, and there were still 3 million dowries in the hands of that family. Master bedroom of the Zhong family. Stepmother Li Yingyuan and Zhong Kefi surrounded Zhong's father, who was lying in bed recuperating, their faces deteriorating one by one. Husband, have you forgotten about the girl Zhong Yuebai? How often she doesn't take us seriously at home. Li Yingyuan complained, covering her heart. Zhong Kefi coquettishly wiped away her non-existent tears and agreed, yes, Dad. People like Zhong Yuebai eat hard instead of soft. When we talk to her in a friendly manner, she only thinks we are weak and deceitful. If we prick her and make her hurt, she will know who is the biggest one in this family. After speaking, he also hinted strongly and pushed Zhong's arm. Zhong's father was praised so much that he nodded confidently, as if forgetting the awkward look of himself lying motionless in bed in plaster. Well, it's not. Dong. The main bedroom door was heavily kicked open. At the door, Zhong Yuebai's cold and bone-chilling gaze fell equally on everyone. I'm not dead yet. It's not good for everyone to calculate on me openly in such broad daylight, isn't it? She said with a playful smile. Just now, Zhong Fu, who was praised by Zhong Kefi for floating, saw Zhong Yuebai's wrinkled face with a smile. Yuebai, you came back so early today, haven't you eaten yet? I remember your favorite dish was the braised eggplant made by Aunt Li. I asked her to make it for you right away, and you can eat it later. Husband. Dad. Li Yingyuan and Zhong Kefi both spoke out to stop. Unfortunately, both of them couldn't stop Zhong's father licking his dog together. Looking at her biological father's face, Zhong Yuebai was not surprised. When his mother's wealth had not yet been fully swallowed by him, he was also able to endure and pretend like a conscientious licking dog. Later, after he obtained everything he wanted, he completely exposed his disgusting and ugly face. It's sad that this despicable person is actually her biological father. If you have something to say, don't waste time. Zhong Yuebai rolled her eyes and didn't give him any face. Before Father Zhong could say anything, Li Yingyuan and Zhong Kefi could no longer control the small universe and began to curse. Zhong Yuebai. What's your attitude when talking to your dad? I really thought you could shake up after marrying Sang Qingze. I think you forgot. Is that scumbag's ashes still in our hands? Li Yingyuan's attitude when she said this made her tremble. Zhong Kefi stood beside her, his demeanor and posture as if carved from the same template. Look at you as a daughter, you can't even afford to buy a cemetery for your mother. She's been dead for so many years, and her ashes are left unattended. How desolate is it? If your mother knew your daughter was so filial, she would probably be so angry that she crawled out of the tomb, right? Oh, by the way, your mother doesn't have a tomb. When Zhong Yuebai's mother passed away, she was still very young. She only remembers her father saying that he had already arranged for her mother and asked her not to worry. It wasn't until she went to college and wanted to sweep her mother's grave that she found out where her mother's ashes had been placed by that man, and she still hasn't been buried to this day. This is also the biggest concern in her heart. You too, how could you say that about Yuebai? Father Zhong was in bed, ignoring his legs in plaster, struggling to remember to help her speak. But Li Yinyuan casually stopped him twice and he was safe. Chapter 8. Dad doesn't want nothing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yuebai is my biological daughter, your biological sister, we are a family. Father Zhong supported his leg in plaster, panting heavily, and spoke with righteousness and righteousness. Don't be fooled by the mediocre development of Yuebai now. Maybe in the future, you too, as well as Kefi's marriage, will have to rely on Yuebai to make arrangements. Have you ever thought about how ugly it would be if you were to ask someone in the future? Li Yinyuan and Zhong Kefi both fell silent. Zhong Yuebai was also true. I never expected that such a simple and foolish set of language could make them start to reflect. Now everyone in the room is immersed in a strange atmosphere, which further highlights the fact that the person standing with arms in the room and watching coldly is like a joker. After dealing with his wife and daughter in 3 sentences, Zhong's father's focus returned to Zhong Yuebai. Yuebai, don't take your sister and aunt's words to heart. They are both straightforward, but their hearts are not bad. They say these things because they are worried about you and thinking about you. If you have something to say, don't talk to others anymore, there's no need to pretend to be a good person. Zhong Yuebai was afraid that if he continued to act like this, he would burst out laughing uncontrollably. Father Zhong gave a simple and kind smile, explaining in a gentle voice. It's like this, a few days ago, we sold something at an auction. We thought there wouldn't be any problem with that serious auction house. But after the auction, they didn't give us the money. Just now, the mother and daughter of Zhong Kefi, who were still beside her and couldn't bear it, also cast their hopeful gaze on Zhong Yuebai upon hearing this. So. Zhong Yuebai raised her eyebrows. She didn't realize that this action was almost the same as Sang Qingze. You are facing Mr. Sang day and night now. We want you to talk to Mr. Sang and help us get the money back, said Father Zhong with a simple smile. If it weren't for witnessing his cruelty with her own eyes, Zhong Yuebai would never have thought that there were people in the world with such good acting skills. Whether it's big or small, for the Sang family, it's just a matter of one sentence. Zhong Yuebai looked at Zhong Kefi's instantly darkened face with a smile on her face. It depends on how much money you want to ask for and what kind of thing you're selling. With our strength, of course we are selling things worth billions. Zhong Kefi didn't want to be compared to Zhong Yuebai even for some minor matters. It's rare for her to say something that makes her proud and proud. She spoke very positively. Really? But the antique gold and jade at home have already been sold out, haven't they? Nowadays, the Zhong family still has such valuable things. Zhong Yuebai laughed. Li Yinyuan was afraid that Zhong Kefi would say too much, which made Zhong Yuebai see the clues. She quickly reached out and grabbed her, who was about to speak again, with a cold snort. There are so many valuable things at home that I can tell you everywhere. Just say, can you be of any help with this? Actually, after Sang Qingze and I obtained the certificate, he gave me a lot of pocket money. Zhong Yuebai casually pulled a chair and sat down to rest, saying slowly, how much money can you get for that thing? Why don't I give it to you so that Sang Qingze doesn't waste time? After she finished this proposal, all 3 of the Zhong family's eyes lit up. This is not bad, it also saves us trouble with each other. Father Zhong was overjoyed, take the things for auction, and the auction house will draw a commission. Moreover, the auction house we entrusted is quite powerful, so we signed a contract and divided it 50-50 with the other party. Divide by 50. Upon hearing this ratio, Zhong Yuebai tightly clenched her hands together before controlling herself from slapping the man to death. She didn't have to guess, they were just worried that the jade wouldn't sell for a good price, and they didn't care how much it could sell for, let alone whether it was the last relic of Zhong Yuebai's mother. So it's better to make this kind of almost free money agreement in order to maximize one's own interests. How selfish, how lewd. Hey, you're not talking, don't you want to help? Don't forget, your mother's ashes are still in our hands. Zhong Kefi didn't hesitate and continued to threaten Zhong Yuebai. Li Yinyuan, standing next to her, saw Zhong Yuebai's face change a few times in an instant, and didn't sarcastically. Speaking so much, I thought the Sang family gave you a few 100 million. Now that you see the real numbers, you're scared. You know the price of bragging. Admit you don't have the money earlier, and suffer all the humiliation in the Sang family. Save us all time, it's good for everyone. Zhong Yuebai took a deep breath, tried to calm her mind, and warned herself not to mix up with scumbags and lower her level. After pausing for 5 seconds, she finally made her tone sound a bit calm. Even if you cut 100 million in half, you only have 50 million. Do you think the Tang family can't even get 50 million out of it? Li Yinyuan, you're just a toad hanging a bell. Make fun of yourself, die early. With this effort, let your good daughter read more books. She can't even get into college, she's embarrassing and thrown into the entire circle. You. Li Yinyuan was so angry that she was about to scold her when she was heavily stopped by Father Zhong, who was not very agile next to her. So, you can solve it. Zhong Fu's smile was no different from licking the dog. Zhong Yu's face was slightly cold as she said, yes, it can. That's great. Father Zhong smiled, I didn't expect you to be so successful now. It's worth my hard work raising you for so many years. A few days ago, when Sang Qingze was going to marry me, she gave her family a dowry of 3 million yuan. Zhong Yu spoke expressionlessly, interrupting her father's imagination. As long as you can return the 3 million yuan for selling your daughter to me, I will definitely give you the money you auctioned off. I'm not looking for money now, but for an explanation. I believe Dad, you can understand, right? Father Zhong, who has always liked to pretend to be a good person and speak those righteous words, was shocked. Li Yinyuan, who was just having an affair with his mistress by the bedside, suddenly became furious. What nonsense are you talking about? How could Sang Qingze give us money? Are you still asleep and dreaming? #% at #Yuan. Zhong Yuebai pretended not to understand when her father looked at Li Yinyuan, with a cold and sinister expression on her face, and also pretended not to see Zhong Kefi's shock. She said calmly. 3 million, it's not worth mentioning compared to what you're selling. You can carefully consider how to choose. However, I've been having a heavy pregnancy lately, so I don't have so much time to waste with you. Moonlight. Even if there is no auction, we will still return the 3 million to you. Father Zhong sighed earnestly, Dad doesn't care about anything. He just hopes that you and Kofi can get married and live well in the future. After speaking, she glared fiercely at Li Yinyuan, with a hint of hatred mixed in her friendly tone. Why don't you give her back the 3 million yuan of your child? Chapter 9. Bringing Mrs. Sang to attend. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhong Yuebai and her father looked at Li Yinyuan expressionlessly together. After enduring for a while, Li Yinyuan reluctantly handed over the 3 million yuan. Moonlight, you see, all the money is here. It was something she did without telling me, I don't even know. Father Zhong handed the money over with a friendly smile. We are a family, and no matter how much money Dad has now, he will always leave it for you and Kefi in the future. Oh, really? Zhong Yuebai hugged her arms and sneered. Zhong's father, however, seemed completely unable to understand her attitude and shyly said, Now, can you go and contact Mr. Sang? I forgot to tell you earlier that the Shangying auction house belongs to the Sang family. Zhong Yuebai smiled and looked at each of their faces. They had already conducted a thorough investigation before the jade auction. What? Upon hearing this, even Father Zhong, who was skilled enough to win an Oscar, vaguely understood something. Zhong Yuebai put the card in her bag, glanced at the bodyguard waiting at the door, turned off her phone with the screen on, and explained carefully. Before my mother passed away, a notarization had already been done, and this piece of jade belonged to me. This auction was only conducted with my permission, and the money should naturally belong to me. As for you selling my 3 million yuan, I will not hesitate to accept it. From now on, you and I, the bridge belongs to the bridge, and the road belongs to the road. Zhong Yuebai. Father Zhong struggled to stand up, disregarding the plaster on his leg, wanting to rush over and fight against her. This time, even though Li Yingyuan was standing by, he didn't weakly fall back into bed like before, but ran towards Zhong Yuebai with high spirits. The bodyguard who had been waiting at the door for a long time saw the opportunity and blocked in front of Zhong Yuebai. Zhong's father had not hit him halfway, but the middle way was caught. He had his hands fixed behind him, and was pressed to the ground by two bodyguards, pressing them tightly. The legs in plaster are tightly pressed against the ground, indicating that even so, there is not much pain. Li Yingyuan and Zhong Kefi, looking at so many tall and imposing people, were so frightened that they couldn't even breathe, let alone come over to save people. Zhong Yuebai walked slowly to Zhong's father, crouched down, and observed his aging face, as well as the wrinkles that could no longer be smoothed out. She let out a long sigh. "Dad, it's been so many years, why are you still the same as before? Why don't you understand? You're old now. With your chubby appearance, you can't deceive anyone anymore. You're just a greasy uncle who's almost old, has no money, and is sleazy and lowly. How did you make yourself believe that with that young trick, you can still continue to deceive people?" After watching many of his performances over the years, Zhong Yuebai couldn't figure it out. Unfortunately, Father Zhong's face was pressed and rubbed against the ground, unable to answer her question. "That woman, 3 days after my mother's death, moved into my house with her younger sister who was only 1 month younger than me, and her older brother who was 2 years older than me. From that day on, you're no longer my father, understand?" Zhong Yuebai looked down at her biological father from a high position and worked hard for a while, but still had no mercy in her heart. She couldn't figure out how her mother was attracted to such a rotten cucumber-like man. Unable to come up with an answer, she had to stand up and her cold gaze swept over the mother and daughter by the bed. 2 seconds later, it calmly moved away again. It seems that they were not taken seriously from beginning to end. Zhong Kefi couldn't help but recall how Zhong Yuebai struggled to survive in this home in the past years. The Zhong Yuebai, who had to beg for mercy like a dog to survive, kept overlapping with the arrogant person in front of her, making her anger uncontrollable. "So, Zhong Yuebai, if I don't personally lift the ashes of your despicable mother, I won't be called Zhong Kefi." Pop. She just finished shouting when she was slapped hard. It's not Zhong Yuebai's hand, but the other 5 idle bodyguards in the room. So for a moment, Zhong Yuebai and Zhong Kefi, who were covering their faces, looked at him in surprise. The old lady said, "We must ensure your safety and your health." The bodyguard withdrew his hand and stood upright. "Health includes both physical and mental health." Zhong Yuebai fell silent. Zhong Kefi covered her instantly swollen face and went crazy. "No, you guys are sick, right? Zhong Yuebai is such a slut." Pop. She didn't finish speaking, and the other half slapped her face again. The one who did it was still the tall and imposing bodyguard, who respectfully said, "I usually don't hit women. Please be honest, Miss Zhong." "Hello, I'm also good." Li Yingyuan stood a step away from Zhong Kefi, already paralyzed by fear. At this moment, Zhong Yuebai suddenly felt that the 8 bodyguards sent by her grandmother before leaving were not all restrained. When it's crucial, it's very useful. Even if you are members of the Sang family, wouldn't you be afraid of me exposing this matter if you hit someone so casually? Li Yinyuan shuddered for a while, holding back these words. The bodyguard who just hit someone was very calm. All of our actions are the responsibility of Madame Sang. If you want to expose them, please feel free to do so. At this point, the mother and daughter were completely quiet like chickens. Zhong Yuebai glanced at the ground again, like a plucked mouse. Zhong's father sneered silently and walked away without looking back. 8 bodyguards followed behind her, a group of fearless and majestic people. As soon as she left, she saw Sang Qingze's black Maybach. In their 2 clear and definite trading relationships, Sang Qingze has always been diligent and responsible in front of others, without interfering with each other behind them. Suddenly coming to see her, there must be something wrong. Adhering to the principle of friendship and mutual assistance, Zhong Yuebai politely approached and asked, "Are you looking for me? Is there anything I can do for you?" Sitting in the back seat of the car, Sang Qingze flipped through a book and paused. Half a second later, he calmly lifted his head and said, "Well, there's a small cocktail party between acquaintances that I can't push off. The other party requested that I bring Mrs. Sang to attend." "Okay, I'm not a problem," Zhong Yuebai agreed decisively. "The butler has arranged some evening dresses for me, and I haven't had the chance to wear them out yet." Sang Qingze's acquaintances are all from this circle. Even if I knew she was Mrs. Sang, it wouldn't affect her life after the divorce in the future. Although the conversation went smoothly as before, Zhong Yuebai didn't know why. After getting in the car, he always felt that the air pressure inside was a bit low. The center of the low-pressure system is Sang Qingze, who sits quietly reading. The talkative driver smiled and said, "I heard that none of the Zhong family members are fuel-efficient lamps. I heard that, madam, you came here to settle the accounts, and I was worried for a long time. It's really great to see that you can come out safely." Chapter 10. Bring my wife to identify people. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. When I left the Zhong family, it was still early. Zhong Yuebai followed Sang Qingze to do some styling and change clothes. When trying on the evening dress, she was once again impressed by her grandmother's aesthetics. She had only been together for a short time, and all the clothes her grandmother chose were suitable, as if she had carefully selected them for a long time. Because it was a small banquet this time, Zhong Yuebai chose a navy blue long cheongsam. Just by looking at the large and delicate embroidery on the hem, one can see that it is of great value. When the makeup artist finished putting on her makeup, coiling her hair, and she walked out of the room step by step, Sang Qingze, who was waiting outside, was stunned. On her delicate and translucent oval face like a white jade, her eyes were as clear and bright as clear water, sparkling and seductive. The curled hair was adorned with a few light blue velvet flowers, adorned with bright pearls at the center, making the whole person elegant and dignified. Madam has a good foundation, she doesn't need to wear heavy makeup, she is already very beautiful. The makeup artist followed Zhong Yuebai and walked out with a smile on her face. Sang Qingze instinctively sat up straight without speaking. He knew she was beautiful, but he didn't expect her to look so beautiful just by dressing up a little. Zhong Yuebai stroked the broken hair at her temples behind her ear and smiled shyly. "How's it going?" "Not bad." Sang Qingze nodded calmly. Zhong Yuebai knew that even if he wasn't close to women, there were still many female celebrities and the like who wanted to take a ride with the Sang family. She was also surprised to receive a compliment from Mr. Sang, who had seen Qianfan before. "You seem to take this little cocktail party very seriously," Zhong Yuebai asked tentatively after the people in the room had left about. Sang Qingze nodded candidly, his gaze fixed on the daffodils planted in the garden outside the window. "Li Yu and his fiancée A.E. will also come," he said. Zhong Yuebai. She probably understood this guy's feelings now. Speaking of which, she hasn't explained her relationship with Li Yu well yet. Zhong Yuebai's gaze only flickered for a moment before becoming firm. "Last time on the ship, I promised to tell you about Li Yu when you came back." Well, you can tell me. Sang Qingze adjusted his sitting position on the sofa in the room, legs crossed, and arms embraced. In an instant, there was a strong sense of oppression. Zhong Yuebai took a deep breath and slowly exhaled before speaking. I met Li Yu during a public elective course at school. He was a famous playboy at the time, skipping classes every day and never calling names. However, he rarely attended the Introduction to Chinese Art course honestly until the end. After class, he came to me and said that the person he liked had gone abroad, and I looked very similar to that person. He asked me to stay by his side, and he would give me money until that person returned home, so I could be free. Compared to Zhong Yuebai, Li Yu's family background can be said to be vastly different. So even though Zhong Yuebai was young and reckless at the time, and refused Li Yu 3 times in person, he never expected him to threaten her with Zhong's family, education, and even her future. Zhong Yu had no choice but to surrender. For a whole year afterwards, Li Yu had a brain lesion and tried to harass her in various ways. It's not surprising to mock and humiliate in public. Zhong Yuebai also wanted to get it, he just wanted to avenge being rejected 3 times at the time. He thought it would be better for him to vent his anger. But Li Yu's methods gradually intensified, and she found that even if she was very obedient, that guy's anger would not dissipate. It would occasionally worsen. The last clue that led to the explosion of their strained relationship was probably the news of Miss Zhou's return to China. At the moment when Zhong Yuebai learned the news, she went to exchange the promised freedom with Li Yu. But to her surprise, Li Yu let out an inexplicable fire and smashed everything in his small villa in the mountains, trying to be strong against Zhong Yuebai. In the previous year, no matter how insane Li Yu was, there was no intimate interaction between them. So this time, Zhong Yuebai was greatly frightened, and when he was agitated and rebelled, it actually stimulated Li Yu's animalistic nature, making his atrocities even more reckless. She only remembered the huge lightning reflected in the French window before she lost consciousness, the thunder roaring in her ears, and Li Yu's hideous face in front of her. When I woke up later, it was in the hospital. The doctor said that I had some bone fractures in my ribs and calf bones, and there were no other problems. After recovering for a while, I didn't see Li Yu again when I returned to school. I thought he had a conscience and decided to get along well with Miss Zhou. I didn't expect to find out last time we met, and he thought I was dead. Zhong Yuebai briefly described the various events that happened throughout the year, as well as the various torments she suffered, and finally focused on Li Yu's illusion. No wonder that guy disappeared so completely. At the same time, Sang Qingze, sitting in front of Zhong Yuebai's face, had a calm expression, but upon closer inspection, he could see the faint veins appearing on his forehead. At first, he thought that the relationship between Zhong Yuebai and Li Yu was a normal couple, so he didn't let anyone follow him anymore. I didn't expect I will have someone investigate this matter. Sang Qingze put in a lot of effort to make her voice sound still cold and calm. From now on, you are Madam Sang, so you don't have to be afraid of that kind of thing anymore. Besides, with your current capital, even if Li Yu's father comes, you will have to say hello to you first. That kind of thing. Zhong Yuebai felt that Mr. Sang's cultural level had reached a certain level. Adjectives can be used so accurately and appropriately. The anger she was holding in her heart dissipated in an instant. So until she appeared at the small banquet, holding Sang Qingze's arm, the smile on her face was real and warm. Li Yu, who was just about to stand near the door, was stunned in an instant. In the last long year of their relationship, he had hardly seen that woman smile so much. The first thing Zhong Yuebai saw was the legendary Miss Zhou. She has a baby face that is white with a hint of red. Under her eyebrows are the beautiful and tearful phoenix eyes. When she suddenly looks over, she only feels that this person is both cute and gentle, with no killing intent at all. Zhong Yuebai didn't know why, but at the moment she touched her gaze, she was convinced that this person must be Miss Zhou. No wonder even if the Zhou family is in dire straits, it can still make Li Yu, a mischievous demon king, and Sang Qingze, a scheming boy, deeply rooted in love. Just by appearance, countless enemies have already been killed, and both men and women have taken advantage of each other. Qingze. The woman walked over with a smile, her voice too sweet to be guarded. It's rare to see you come so early. Is the company okay today? During his speech, he completely ignored Zhong Yuebai, who was hanging from Sang Qingze's arm. There are many things, Sang Qingze responded calmly, but just got married and I have to bring my wife to recognize someone. Pop. A crisp sound rang out, and Miss Zhou's crystal cup was shattered on the marble floor.